Well, hello and welcome to Off the Bench here on a Monday. It's a 2-0 Monday here in Cincinnati, something that we haven't had in 7 years, but obviously we all know that it's not the biggest day for celebration or the day that you'd hope it would be for celebrating after a 2-0 start, but here we are. Regardless, the Bengals are 2-0. Those are the situations in front of us. Joe Burrow is going to miss a lot of time going ahead here, but I'll tell you right now that I'm cautiously optimistic, but before we get our show underway, it will just be me here in the seats, but we have Stone Shields, our crack producer. Stone, how are you on this lovely Monday?
Reed, I'm doing all right. I've been better. Bengals are 2-0, but obviously there's a lot to discuss as it relates to the quarterback and his toe injury.
Yeah, it's 2018 was the last time, so they haven't been 2-0 under Zac Taylor. And while the biggest story, obviously, on this Monday is Joe Burrow. Is that he's going to need toe surgery? Is that it wasn't worst case scenario, but pretty close to worst case scenario? I think that's what Jay Morrison said, and obviously we all agree that missing 3 months of time, needing surgery, and even if the most lenient time window is that he comes back in the middle of December, it's obviously a day for not a lot of excitement. But I'm not that kind of a guy. I'm an optimistic guy, always have been. I think even on the show last week, I was watching some of the clips, and I was like, man, I feel a little negative. So on today's show, before we dive into Joe Burrow and all this stuff, I do want to start it off on a positive note. And it's towards a guy that I think gets a proper amount of flack in this city. I think all the questions regarding this guy are well warranted, and that's Zack Taylor. You know, before the week yesterday, before the game yesterday, they were talking, hey, if Joe Burrow or if the Cincinnati Bengals don't make the postseason, then Zack Taylor's job is gone. And I have an opinion on that I'll get to later. But Zack Taylor's seat was undoubtedly hot. But in the 6 years that Zack Taylor has been the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, there's one thing that I think you can't even deny, that I don't think you can argue against, that is undeniable, and that is we saw it yesterday from the 8-minute mark in the second quarter to the end of the game when Joe Burrow went down. His teams fight. His teams constantly are battling. They don't give up. They don't give in. And we saw it 2 years ago in 2023 when Joe Burrow had the season-ending injury. They fought. With Jake Browning at the helm, they had this team in a chance to make the postseason come season's end. Other teams, other coaches, you'll see it here in the next couple weeks amongst several teams around the league when things are very bleak. We're already seeing it down in Miami. Mike McDaniels and that team, they had a team meeting after week one. Things get bleak. People start giving in. They start giving up. But for whatever reason, Zac Taylor's teams continue to fight. And when you're making a head coach, like if you could start one, make a fantasy head coach, pick one of one on talents that you could have this guy be, is that his teams always fight, especially in this sport. My dad was a coach. My brother's a coach. My uncle's a coach. My cousins are all coaches everywhere around this city. And the number one thing that a team must always have is they never give up. They always continue to put their best foot forward. They continue to put the best energy, and you rally around the team when things get bleak. When your star elite quarterback goes down and is going to miss the rest of the game, he's going to miss 3 months now that we know. How does your team respond? Where's the resiliency? And that's one thing that this Cincinnati Bengals team showed yesterday. They'll continue to show. And in this moment where you're looking ahead, you're 2-0, you look at the schedule, you see some wins on the back end of the schedule, the most optimistic viewpoint is that Joe Burrow can come back in the middle of December. Maybe you're still in the playoff hunt. Maybe you can get him right and you get in the postseason and make some magic happen. There's few coaches in the league that I'd rather have under the scenario than Zac Taylor, based off of what I've seen. I've on this show probably put my foot in my mouth about coaches like Nick Sirianni for the Philadelphia Eagles, who look at the best team in the NFL, who won the Super Bowl last year. But what did his team do 2 years ago when things got tough? They quit. Lost 6 of the last 7 games. Got blown out in a postseason game. And it looked like they didn't want to be there at all. Now he's turning around, so kudos to him. But you never see that with this Cincinnati Bengals team. And maybe it's an attribute not only to Zac Taylor, but to Joe Burrow and kind of the chemistry and how people amongst the team think about him, that when they see him go down, that can sometimes galvanize a bunch. But point blank, if I told you yesterday when Joe Burrow was sitting down on the field, and they showed the replay a million times, and they show him walking off the field and he needs help walking into the locker room. If I told you at that point, Bengals down 7, that Jake Browning would throw 3 interceptions in relief efforts for Joe Burrow, and the Bengals would win, you all would call me crazy, but they won. 2-0 to start the season, the first time in the Zac Taylor era. And there's other things to be happy about when it comes to the head coach, and we're going to get to Joe Burrow eventually. But I would just want to start it off on a positive spin, because there are a lot of things that you can get excited about when with Zac Taylor as your head coach. This team rarely has penalties. They seem to always put their foot forward on the opening couple drives offensively. They clearly, as we've shown, galvanize around poor moments. And like I said, if you ask me, your coach can do one thing. He can be an excellent X's and O's guy, or he's great at clock management, or he's great at game management and understanding situations. He's amazing at developing talent, but they just don't fight that hard. They don't play that hard. In the sport of football, the number one thing you need is guys going out there and playing. And that's what they did yesterday, and that's what I think they'll continue to do going forward. Now, let's talk about Joe Burrow. You scroll through x.com, and the game ends, and like I said, yesterday they show time and time again the replay, and I don't know how you guys feel as a diehard Bengals fan that I am, and it shows. Maybe arrogantly, ignorantly, sometimes, as a Bengals fan. I'm an optimistic guy, and I hate how many times they showed that replay yesterday. And I get it was the biggest story, so that's what you got to show on the broadcast. And they show him walking off the field into the tunnel, and then for some reason they set up a camera in the bay, heading to the locker room. They probably haven't used that camera in 7 years, but they used it right there to show him going to the locker room. And it makes your stomach fall that the guy that has lit a fire under this city so many times, Joe Burrow, has drawn Bengals fans out from a place you didn't even know they existed. Listen, my in-laws, they're not the biggest into sports. My mother-in-law, she loves the Bengals now. Flies a Bengals flag outside, and a great part to do is with Joe Burrow and what he was able to do at the early parts of his career. Year 2, year 3. He's the reason that we have so much excitement. He's the reason that we have so much to look forward to, so much hope, so many aspirations to go into the Super Bowl, to beat really anybody that is in front of us, because we've seen him do it before. And he goes down for the 3rd time in 6 seasons, 2 season-ending injuries. And this one looks like it's going to gobble up at least 12 weeks. At least 12 weeks. The pessimistic will say that he won't come back at all. And if the season's not in the ballots anymore, if the season's done by the time he's getting ready to play, then yeah, why play him at all? But on the short end side, he's coming back middle December. So a 3rd drastic injury in season in 6 years. And not to mention, something that you can't control, an appendectomy. and not to mention the non-contact calf injury. And you guys are going to hate for me to say this, but yes, the front office takes some blame. Takes a lot of the blame for not being able to protect Joe Burrow. Yes, the offensive line through his entire career hasn't played well. We know Joe takes more sacks than the average quarterback because of the way he extends plays. But Joe Burrow does deserve a little bit of, I don't want to call it criticism, but flack here. He's part of the reason this continues to happen. You don't have 5 separate injuries, 4 injuries and an illness. Once again, I'll keep lumping in the appendectomy. Maybe I shouldn't. To different parts of the body without getting the terrible moniker as being fragile. He is. I'm sorry to tell you that, but that is what he is. He's elite. He's probably the most accurate passer in the league. Coaches and former quarterbacks in the league rave about his ability to change plays pre-snap, his extending, one of the true smartest quarterbacks in the league. And he doesn't have elite arm strength, but he's able to play at an elite level. And yeah, he's got great talents, but he's able to beat anybody on any given week and play better than anybody in the NFL on any given week. But one of the flaws, because every quarterback, every player, every human being has flaws, is that he is fragile. He is. And that's something that we now have to, if you didn't already, are now going to have to factor into every season. Or every season that he's still here. I know there's some people that went fully off the deep end. I'm like, strip it all down. What's it matter anymore? Trade everyone. Not doing that. But Joe, this is a part of what he is, who he is as a player. And I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what you can make of that. And you could say that this front office hasn't done anything to make it better. That's not entirely true. And I don't know if this is better. I don't know if it's worse. They've tried. They have attempted to make that offensive line better. You can't knock them for not trying, because they have. Point blank, they have. They sign Orlando Brown, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa. They use a first-round pick on Amarius Mims. Like, they've spent money, they've spent capital, they've spent time trying to make that offensive line better. And maybe it's in a worse place, but it's still not good. Maybe ineptitude is worse than effort. They've tried, so you can't knock them for not trying. In the pie chart of who's to blame for another injury, is it the front office? Is it just the offensive line? Is it to Joe? I think Joe bears more blame than we've given him credit for, or than we've given him in years past. I don't know about you, but here I want Joe, if he does come back, if he does play for us again, because I know how great of an arm, because I know how accurate he is, because I know how well he can read a defense, all that stuff, I want him to play a little less mobile. I want him to get rid of the ball quicker. I want him to make quicker throws. I want him to stand in the pocket and not extend plays. And I know that part of the reason that he is elite, part of the reason that he is great is because of his extendability. But I'm willing to shield some of that, tear that back, so that he continues to play longer into the season. I am. I will take 90%, 85% of Joe Burrow over no Joe Burrow any day of the week. Every single day of the week. I'll take that. If he comes back in the middle of December and we're still in a playoff hunt, we got to win the last 3 games to get in there, I want Joe Burrow to play. And people were asking, what happens if the Bengals are playing great? Jake Browning's playing great, and Joe's coming back. Let me get out in front of this and say, if Joe Burrow's cleared to play, I want him to play, unless the season's done. Unless they're 4-10 when he comes back. I want Joe Burrow to play if he's cleared to play. I said that years ago, and I was probably wrong in 2023. I was probably wrong to start the year when he was, nursing that calf injury. Because we saw what Jake Browning did at the back end of the year, and Joe wasn't very good through the first 4 weeks. But if he's clear, I want Joe to play. I want Joe. I just don't know where to be. I'm not going to go off the deep end, and I haven't read your guys' chats yet. I don't know where to go. I am going to, as a fan, I'm just telling you guys the point blank. You guys can do whatever you want as in your own fandom. Everyone watching this, everyone listening to this, as a fan of the Cincinnati Bengals, I am going to be as optimistic as I possibly can until it showed me some reason not to. Until they lose by 20. Maybe they lose by 20 this Sunday to Minnesota. And the defense just, you can't do it. Can't do it anymore. Maybe it's 3 straight losses. Maybe it's, I don't know. But I'm going, maybe the injury is, we get word that he won't come back at all in a couple weeks. The surgery went okay, but the road to recovery is not going to be as expedited as we had hoped. And he's gone for the season. Then I'll go into the pit of despair that I see many Bengals fans already have. But as of right now, I'm looking at where the Bengals are at, 2-0. Once again, first time since 2018, so that is a cause for some celebration. And I'm looking at the schedule for the rest of the year. They finished the season playing the Miami Dolphins. They finished the season playing the Arizona Cardinals and the Cleveland Browns, who might be the 3 worst teams in the National Football League. In any hope that you want to make the postseason, those 3 got to be wins. So you bookend the season with a 5-0, 2 to start the year, 3 to end the year. Leaves you 12 games in the middle. Can Jake Browning and the Cincinnati Bengals go 5-7 amongst the next 12 weeks? That's the question. That gets you to 10-7. That likely gets you in. There's some other games in there. New York Jets, Chicago Bears don't look good. Steelers had a loss yesterday. There's other games on the schedule that you can look around and be like, all right, this could be a win. And we're going to be behind the 8 ball with a backup quarterback and a not great defense. And it seems like the chips are stacked against us, but we just lucked into 2 wins, and I'm going to try and make the most of it. Because we didn't deserve to win. Week 1, we probably didn't deserve to win yesterday. But guess what? We won them both 2-0. Here we go. Let's go, baby. So, Stone, as I wrap up this monologue to start the show, any thoughts on what I said to begin it with Zac Taylor? And I just wanted to give a guy that catches so much flack kudos for having a team always ready to fight.
Yeah, I think Zac Taylor deserves a ton of credit for how this game transpired, right? I wasn't at the game. You weren't at the game either. But just from watching it on TV, clearly just the air left that place when number 9's down on the ground, the helmet's off. He tries to get up. He can't get up, can't put pressure on the foot. And Zac Taylor remained calm. He stayed poised. We've been in this spot before with the Cincinnati Bengals where they've had to turn to Jake Browning. And I thought Zac Taylor did a good job of putting him in pretty good situations. And one thing, particularly once the game transitioned to the second half, it was very apparent and obvious to me how much they shifted what they were doing offensively with Jake Browning back there as opposed to Joe Burrow. And I think a lot of people out there might be considering, hey, why don't we do some of this stuff when Burrow is out there, right? You see with Joe Burrow, it's a lot of spread it out, empty backfield, 5-step drop. You know, with Jake Browning, it was a lot of 3-step drop stuff, get the ball out of his hands quickly, get it to Jamar Chase, who, by the way, is really, really good. And they had some success moving the ball there in the second half. So I think Zac Taylor does deserve a ton of credit. You know, and as we were talking off the air, you're 2-0, right? If you're 0-2 or maybe even 1-1, you can probably put a bow on this and it might just be about over. But you're 2-0. You haven't lost a football game yet. And, you know, the news we got this morning, it isn't apparently season ending. There's a chance he could come back. So, you know, if Jake Browning can keep this thing afloat, go about, you know, 500, get Joe Burrow back in December, January, whatever it is, I think you still have a bit of a chance. So, obviously, it's kind of a dark day, probably the darkest victory Monday we've had in a while here in Cincinnati. But at the end of the day, the season's not over because you have a perfect record right now. And as you mentioned, there's plenty of winnable games, lots of star power on the team, and a really competent, really good head coach in Zac Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, all last week I feel like I bagged on Zac Taylor. I did, and this wasn't a chance to compensate for that. This wasn't an opportunity for me to be like, I feel like I was kind of hard last week. Now I got to be nice. No, it's not that at all. I don't care. I don't care if if I'm seen as a Zac Taylor hater or a Zac Taylor believer, I will tell you openly that I think that Zac Taylor is, if you split head coaches in half, he's on the better half, right? I think he's a top 16 head coach in the league. He's probably the worst in the division. But I think he's a competent head coach. You don't win the AFC. You don't beat Andy Reid in the postseason and Sean McDermott and Josh Allen. And I know it did that with Joe Burrow. But you don't beat those guys, John Harbaugh, in the postseason without being somewhat of a good head coach. And I'll tell you guys, for the people that wanted Zac Taylor gone regardless, for the people that were almost kind of hoping that the Bengals didn't make the postseason, or maybe they weren't hoping, but they knew they had a win-win because if the Bengals make the postseason, that's great. If they don't make the postseason, the Bengals are getting a new head coach, which very much was the hot seat or the theory that going around Zac Taylor. For that, I'll tell you, Zac Taylor ain't going anywhere now, guys. he got another get-out-of-jail-free card. Because whatever happens this year, Mike Brown, who has shown us nothing but to sit on his hands when it comes to getting rid of head coaches, Zac Taylor's going to get another year at this thing. Unless my whole opening monologue about fight was just dead wrong and this team is just a disaster going forward. Unless every single week for the next 8 weeks they just get blown out and look completely incompetent. Unless that happens, then you might see Zac Taylor gone. But I would, if you had to put a percentile, I'd say you got about a 97% chance that Zac Taylor's coming back as the head coach next year. And you can grit your teeth and do everything you want, but you're going to have to bear it because that just is what it is. And Stone brought up an excellent point. The reason for my optimism going forward is simply because they've won the first 2 games. We looked at the schedule, saw a team that the Cleveland Browns, who might be the worst team in the league, you got to win that one. They did, barely, but they won it. And then a Jags team, who I think is, honestly, I think that AFC South is pretty good. I think the Texans, Jags, and Colts are all pretty competent teams, playoff contenders. I think the Jags will be competing for a playoff spot come the end of the year. And you beat them at home. Got some luck to go your way. Had a fortunate call on the final drive. You had a quarterback that, played so aggressively, and that's part of the great part. One of the great things about having a backup quarterback is you can go like, hey, man, he doesn't know what he doesn't know. He's just playing. He's just ready to rock. And Jake Browning has been a very serviceable backup quarterback. He's actually been more than that. He's been one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league. He's as good. He's about as good as you can ask for when it comes to backup quarterback play. But yeah, you sit here on a Monday and you know if they're 1-1, it's not good. They're 0-2, it's done. The season's over with the Joe Burrow missing 12 games. In fact, if they were 0-2, this show would feel much differently. In this show, if they're 0-2, we're figuring out what we could trade Trey Hendrickson for, what we could trade T. Higgins for, maybe not Jamar Chase. But we start talking about, hey, should we ship him out early to get the biggest return? Should we start tanking for as early of a draft pick as we can? That's what that show looks like if they're 0-2. 1-1, I don't even know what the show looks like, but luckily it's 2-0. So I get to be cautiously optimistic that this Bengals team is going to stay afloat, that Joe Burrow is going to have a great surgery and recover well, come back on schedule or even ahead of schedule and play throughout December where this Bengals team has played historically great. And if they are in a playoff hunt come December and he does come back, they have 3 winnable games to kind of tune up his talents and, get right as rain going into the postseason. That's where the optimism comes from. And you guys don't want to hear it. I get it. You don't want to hear the optimistic take. You want to sit down and be, why does Cincinnati, why does all these bad things happen to Cincinnati? Why can't we have anything nice? And I don't know the reason, but I'm not a guy who's going to sit here and whine. Because though it's not good, though your franchise quarterback has shown nothing but to be a fragile guy, though this offensive line that we expected to be better looks just as bad, if not worse than it's been in years past, though there's serious questions about the defensive side, though they had some really nice plays, though all of that, You get to sit in here on a Monday and get to be optimistic, and you get to look at the schedule and be like, I can see a pretty clear route in which this Bengals team is competing in the AFC playoffs come January. And he can put your arms around that and hope for the best. Because at the end of the day, that's all we got. Now tell me, is my criticism, Stone, of Joe being fragile? That is an explosive word. That is an incendiary word when I say Joe Burrow is fragile. I love Joe. He's probably my favorite athlete ever. I've defended him countless times on the Chatterbox Airways on this show, and I'll continue to defend him until the cows come home. You know this. People that have been longtime watchers and listeners of this show understand that fully. That I will go to bat for Joe Burrow in every situation. But I can't defend him when he's had a fourth injury to a fourth different body part. 1 non-contact, 3 midseason, 3 of those, 2 of them season-ending, 1 pretty much a season-ender. We're hoping that it's not. Is my criticism of calling Joe Burrow fragile, is it too harsh, Stone?
Unfortunately, no, it's not. We're going to hear people nationally say that very sentence for the next couple of weeks and the next couple of months as well, all offseason when, people are getting hyped about the 2026 NFL offseason. They're talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. They're going to say that as well. And as fans, it's going to frustrate all of us, but it's just kind of the reality of the situation, right? And these injuries that he's had, it's not like, it's a sprained ankle, he's going to miss a couple of weeks. As you mentioned, they're very rare injuries. I mean, this turf toe, as far as an NFL quarterback needing surgery on the turf toe, that's going to cause him to miss multiple months. It's borderline unprecedented for an NFL quarterback. Mahomes had it a few years ago, but he was able to play through it and ended up getting that surgery at the end of the season. Obviously, the wrist, right? Unprecedented, really, for a quarterback in the NFL to have that type of injury. And the knee injury, that wasn't like he just tore his ACL, right? It was the ACL, the PCL, the MCL, and the meniscus. Like, the whole knee was completely ruined. So, it's frustrating that we're going to have to hear people say that as people that love Joe Burrow as much as you and I do. It's going to be, disappointing and just flat out sad that we're going to have to hear that. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of the reality of the situation. Through 6 seasons here in the NFL, he has had 3 injuries that have caused him to miss large chunks of the season. That's half. And that doesn't even include the appendectomy, right? That doesn't even include the sprained knee in the Super Bowl or even earlier in the 2021 season where he had the dislocated pinky that he was able to play through. So it's been just a long list of injuries for Joe Burrow. When he's out there on the field, he's the best in the game. But as you take a look and kind of take a step back and evaluate his entire NFL career to this point, a lot of it's been, flagged with very serious injuries, and that's just kind of the reality of the situation.
And I see people are in the chat, and I knew this would happen, and they're saying, I'm saying it's all Joe's fault. No. It's not all Joe's fault. It's the reason he's had 1 non-contact injury. That was his calf in training camp in 2023. He's had 1 non-contact injury. This toe, the knee, and the wrist were all a direct causation of bad offensive line play. Boy was getting murdered out there, and he got murdered last week against the Browns. But that being said, he's getting hit a lot. The NFL, you're going to get hit a lot. Josh Allen puts his body in danger every single week. The difference is, and this is where I'm going to get into body anatomy here, Josh Allen's 6'5", 260 pounds. He can take a beating. Joe Burrow isn't that. Physically, he's not that. He's not thin. He's not Jaden Daniels where he's 6'4" and 170 pounds. He's not that. But we know he's not Big Ben. We know he's not Josh Allen either. So his body can't take as much of a beating as other players. And when there's 4 different injuries to 4 different parts of your body, I don't know what else to say other than there's obviously serious injury concern. If you don't want me to use the word fragile, fine. There's injury concern. And once again, it's not his fault. I don't know what in your DNA makes you not injury concern, or what about the way you take care of yourself makes you not injury ridden? I don't know what it is about it, but whatever it is, there's something there. And he's getting hit all the time. So it's a recipe for disaster. I don't know if you guys have ever driven a Jeep, but I wouldn't ever want to be in a crash in one of those things. And you say it's a great car, and maybe you shouldn't drive it recklessly if you don't want it. Yeah, that's true, right? Like, yeah, it's the reason he's getting injured is because the offensive line is constantly hitting him. But if you get in a wreck, I don't want to be a Jeep. If my guy's going to get hit as frequently as Joe gets hit, I want him to be Josh Allen or Big Ben or one of these bigger guys. But he's not. It's not. Like I said, it's a Venn diagram. It's a pie chart. There's causation on both sides, but one of the elements is because Joe Burrow's body can't take it. It can't take it. Which is whenever he comes back, I'm just going to warn you, I think there's going to be a different Joe Burrow. And this is me speculating. This is me looking out forward, projecting a little bit. I think we're going to see a different Joe Burrow going forward. It's not going to be the guy that's constantly looking for escape routes in the pocket. I don't think it's going to be the same Joe Burrow where he's making Superman passes to get touchdowns like he did last year. And for what it's worth, I thought Joe Burrow looked pretty good in the couple of drives that we saw. I saw some really nice throws from him. There was one on the run that just wows you. I don't think we're going to see to the same extent that we've seen. I think there's going to be a more cautious guy. Tom Brady, TB12, the Tom method, whatever, the Brady method, all that stuff. You want to know why Tom Brady he got rid of the ball really quick. He had great lines, but my boy got rid of it very fast. Always did. Peyton Manning, pretty quick, getting rid of the ball. There's a lot of similarities between, everyone, the knock on Peyton Manning when he was coming up was that, he had all these great weapons, can't win in the postseason. Burrow has all these great weapons, can win in the postseason, can't win in the regular season. Like, there's some similarities there. But I think we're going to see a different Joe Burrow whenever he comes back. Whether it's next year, I just don't think that it's sustainable. I don't think we need to be holding our breath collectively, all the millions in the Cincinnati metropolitan area, every time Joe Burrow scrambles out. And it does suck as a fan because I had just gotten past the point. The entire last year, the entire season, every time Joe Burrow was about to get hit, you hold your breath because of what happened on Thursday Night Football 2 years ago. Because we had already seen 2 season-ending injuries. And I feel like as a fan, I had just gotten by that, just gotten past that. Until the 8-minute mark yesterday when he goes down, he's pointing at his leg. And you find out that it's turf toe and there's torn ligaments and he's going to need surgery. Went to a couple different opinions and they all said the exact same thing. So hopefully they get him in surgery by the end of today or tomorrow, as quick as possible so that we can start the recovery process. And listen, it's tough here in town. But I'm just begging you, let's not hit the panic. You can hit the panic. Sure, you can be in the panic room. But let's not just go directly off the deep end. What's it matter? What's it matter anymore? Jake Browning's been good. Jake Browning's now our quarterback. We're not going to win any playoff games with Jake Browning, and that's not the role I see forward. The role I see is that he keeps us in play, and then Joe Burrow comes back. Let's sell it all off. We can't sustain having Joe here because he can't sustain being on the field. Let's see if we can get anything for him and Trey and T. Strip it all down. Let's retool and try to compete in a couple of years. Let's not do that either. Because as I've mentioned time and time before, winning in the National Football League comes down to typically about 4 things. We'll say 3. If you got a great quarterback, an elite quarterback, it's hard to lose games in this league. Even the last 2 years as Joe, they had winning records. It's hard, and the defense was historically bad. And the year before that, they played one of the hardest schedule in the history of the National Football League. And half of it was with either a banged up or a backup quarterback, and they went 9-8. Like it's hard to lose games with an elite quarterback. So check there for the Bengals. It's hard to lose games with an elite head coach. Can you imagine? I mean, the Chiefs are 0-2, and they've got Patrick Mahomes too. But you see Andy Reid? Do you think they're worried about the Chiefs going forward? Yeah, maybe in the capacity that they don't look like Super Bowl contenders anymore. But you think they're worried about them having a winning record or going to the postseason? No. And then the third one is if you can control the line of scrimmage. That is evident at all levels of football, from Pee Wee up into the NFL. That if you got a great offensive line, it's hard to lose games. If you got a historically great defensive line, it's hard to lose games. So that's where I don't let's retool, let's do it all over again. No. We've got Joe Burrow, and I'm willing to roll my dice on an injury-ridden Joe Burrow every single year, other than just strip it all down and let's draft a new quarterback. Let's trade Joe Burrow in the offseason, and let's trade T. Higgins, and let's trade Trey Hendrickson, and let's just see if we can start this whole thing and compete in 2 years. No. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. And maybe we're having a different talk if they lose the next 4 games, and they're 2-4, to where you're like, all right, now we do need to trade Trey Hendrickson. But as of right now, they're 2-0. And we're going to keep it alive. We're going to keep it all alive. All right, we're at 10:37, so I do got to do a quick ad read. The Job Center is now hiring. Start working fast with weekly pay. Flexible shifts and great opportunities at top local employers. Apply in person at any location across 12 states or online at jobcenter.com. Light up your events with Queen City Screens. Our cutting-edge LED video boards deliver vibrant visuals and a crystal-clear displays for any occasion. From concerts to corporate events, we've got you covered. Visit queencityscreens.com to rent your LED solution today. Queen City Screens, where brilliance meets impact. Stone, before I transition into kind of just talking about different players and different plays from yesterday's game, because I don't want to do the Joe Burrow thing for the entire hour that I have, although I know that it is the biggest topic of conversation today. Is there any final points or anything that you want to push back on or agree with in anything I've said so far about Zach and Joe?
I don't think so. I think you've pretty much hit the nail right on the head. Looking forward to transitioning here, giving some kudos to the defensive side of the football, because were they as good as they were against Cleveland? No. Did they give up a lot of yards? Yes. But at the end of the day, they put Cincinnati in a spot to win the football game. Obviously, those 2 interceptions, huge, from Dax Hill, of course, and Jordan Battle. And the guy that was able to create that first interception is Trey Hendrickson. Obviously, we're going to steer the conversation a little bit to other guys on this team and the defense. But my first thing that came to mind after watching the game yesterday was obviously stuff related to Joe Burrow. But beyond that was Cincinnati Bengals are 0-2 without Trey Hendrickson. But they have Trey Hendrickson, and now they're 2-0. And I kind of wanted to get your take on that. Continually showed up on third down. He was disruptive getting to the quarterback, and he has been huge in both these 2 games. Cincinnati, obviously, kind of last minute. Couldn't work out a long-term deal with Hendrickson, give him that pay for this season, as he's up around $30 million. And he was excellent yesterday once again, and I think really is the number one reason the Bengals are 2-0.
I think Trey Hendrickson had as good of a day yesterday that I've seen him play in a Bengals uniform. I truly 100% mean that. And everyone, I've not minced words about the whole contract situation with Trey Hendrickson in the entire offseason. I thought it was ridiculous that, not ridiculous that he's asking for an extension, but ever since he signed that extension a couple years ago, that he was upset with the money. It's like, you signed the contract, dude. And I know you're out playing it and you have a right to go to the table, but we have a right to say, no, you signed this, you should come and play. And then obviously they give him just the pay raise just to get him on the field and get 2 weeks of practice. Fine. It's whatever. I hated it at the moment, but here we are in the season, and I said once the season started, I wouldn't care anymore. Trey Hendrickson has been worth every dollar that we've paid him. He's the reason that we got the interception on the goal line stand. So that they score that touchdown right there, the game's over. But Trey Hendrickson obviously knocks it loose. We get the pick. We go down and score. That was our first touchdown of the game. And he made big play after big play. Trey Hendrickson has been absolutely fantastic. And much like Joe Burrow at times with the offensive line, he's doing it all on his own. Like, I know Shamar has played well, and Joseph Asai has shown flashes. Miles Murphy, what the heck's happening? But Trey has pretty much done it all on his own accord. So, shout out to Trey Hendrickson. He has been absolutely fantastic. And a guy that I've bashed the entire offseason, and a guy that when you deserve credit, you get credit. He's been absolutely phenomenal. He's been worth every single dollar, and maybe the $14 million pay raise for 2 weeks of practice, which I don't know how good you guys are at math. That is labeling a Zac Taylor-led practice at $1 million a day. Maybe that's his speaking fee. Maybe you should just go do part-time coaching, and I'll come coach for $1 million a day. But hey, it's looking great. Another player that I thought played well on the defensive side was our rookie linebacker, Demetrius Knight. I don't know if you saw – I know you watched a replay of the game, but did he come up on your screen and you notice anything from him? I thought he was fantastic in his ability to tackle.
Yeah, I think that's what Cincinnati was looking for when they picked him. They wanted to bring in a mature guy that had played a ton of football that could really step into a leadership role early in his career, even as a rookie, and I thought he was flying around, making lots of plays. And I think really the thing to me that stands out the most about Demetrius Knight Jr. is how well he complements Logan Wilson, because Logan Wilson clearly off to an incredible start here this year. The past couple of years have been kind of up and down. Now he's back with his guy that was his linebackers coach in 2021, where he had the best year of his career. Al Golden's back, of course, now the defensive coordinator, and Logan Wilson looks quick out there. He looks fast. He looks healthy, and I think that's something that is really intriguing for Cincinnati. And Demetrius Knight, they need guys that can come up and make tackles in the open field in space. We talked about a lot last year why the reason they got off to such a slow start. Yeah, their offense had their ups and downs, what have you, but the defense, they'd be in situations in the open field where they would have opportunities to make tackles and weren't able to do so. And clearly there has been improvement in the tackling department. There's a lot you can pick apart about the Cincinnati defense, how they played yesterday. Again, we're kind of falling into this situation where it feels like they're a little bit too turnover reliant, right? Obviously, all the turnovers they've created these first 2 weeks, if those don't happen, obviously they don't win the football game. But as it relates to Demetrius Knight Jr., I think you got to be very pleased. I know when he was drafted, it was kind of split. Some people were like, oh, this is a great pick. Some people were like, why are we getting a linebacker? We need a safety or something like that. But really pleased with how he played and how he's shown up as a leader these first 2 weeks as well. And I think he's only going to continue to get better each and every week.
Yeah, Demetrius Knight has he's been exactly what you wanted. The tackling has been better as a defensive front. And, the Jags, Trevor Lawrence, who people – I think I'm still a Trevor Lawrence believer. I'll tell you one thing that I made a lot of proclamations about Caleb Williams a couple years ago, and man, those aren't looking good at the moment. But I've also said some things about Trevor Lawrence, and now he's got Liam Cohen, and they moved the ball for 400 yards. Obviously, Liam Cohen wasn't very happy. There were some times where Trevor Lawrence didn't look good, but this defense came up with big plays, and that's where we've said that this team's going to have to continue to do. This team is not going to be the Philadelphia Eagles defense, where they can hold Patrick Mahomes to, 17 points, but you can constantly hold him. Like this team's going to give up points. This team's going to give up drives, long sustained drives, a lot of yards, 400 yards yesterday. Can they come up with turnovers? And through the first 2 weeks, they've done exactly that. We play another team this week, and the Minnesota Vikings, who have a young quarterback, essentially a rookie, in J.J. McCarthy, who in 8 quarters of play has looked good for exactly one of them. So I hope that our defense can have another good week. People pointed out yesterday when I was doing the live stream, and thank you for this, that the Jake Browning kind of – the first game in which we're like, man, we got something here with Jake Browning was the Jacksonville Jaguars game a couple years ago. If you recall what happened in 2023, Joe Burrow goes down on Thursday Night Football against the Ravens. The next week they go and play the Pittsburgh Steelers at home, and you're like, can you muddy up a game and just win a game ugly? No, they didn't. It looked terrible. They got their tail whipped. And then what happens? They play the Jacksonville Jaguars on Monday Night Football, I believe it was. It was a primetime game. It was either Sunday night or Monday night. And I think they were 10-plus point underdogs. Like, it was a double-digit underdog. And the Jacksonville Jaguars were in line for the number 1 overall seed at the time. And Jake Browning had an electric game. 370, just dumping screens off the entire time. Then the week after that, I believe they played the Minnesota Vikings. And that was T. Higgins making the catch on the 1-yard line and quickly turning around and flipping the ball over the pylon for the game-winning touchdown. So I don't know what there is. I don't know if there's a take to make about all that, but it is just quite a coincidence that the two games that we remember most from the Jake Browning stretch where he had to start back in 2023 were that Jacksonville Jaguars game and then the Minnesota Vikings the next week. So it's just funny that we have that. I think the Bengals at the current moment, the line I saw was 4.5 as an underdogs this Sunday, 1 p.m. Thank you guys for being here today. This Sunday, the Bengals, Chatterbox Bengals, will be doing a live watch-along from Smoke Justice down in Covington, Kentucky. So come on down. I'll be there. It'll be a lot of fun. We'll sing the song when they score. But, yeah, Jake Browning's going to have an opportunity to get this team to 3-0 against a team. And like I said, they're 4.5-point underdogs. So you got to wonder, what's that line look like if Joe Burrow is the starting quarterback? Because even with Joe Burrow as a starting quarterback and even with J.J. McCarthy playing as bad as he did on Sunday Night Football yesterday, I have a hard time believing that the Bengals would be favored in that matchup. Am I crazy for thinking that? Like, I would tend to believe that Joe Burrow is worth about a touchdown, worth about 6 points in a betting line. So you take you 6 plus 4.5, they're 2.5-point favorite. Am I crazy for thinking that they'd be favored against the Vikings? Because I do not think they'd be favored, Stone. Do you think they'd be favored?
It'd be close. It'd be, obviously on the road, that certainly impacts it as well. I think it would probably be, a 1.5, 2-point type of game with Joe Burrow at quarterback.
Yeah, it's I thought that line was quite interesting. Yesterday's game, as we're continuing to talk about it, there's some other players. I mean, I think Jamar Chase. I said on the pregame show, if you were going to make a bet towards that Bengals game, the only one that I felt really confident is bet Jamar Chase to score because he wasn't involved at all against the Cleveland Browns and really hasn't been against the Cleveland Browns his entire career. They've done a really nice job at stopping Jamar Chase. But here he was in week 2 against the Jags, and I think it was about 150 yards, had a touchdown on that slant route, was there. And time again, Jamar Chase comes up with big plays, and that's what he did yesterday. So Jamar Chase proving once again why he's, if not the best wide receiver in the league, he's the second best wide receiver in the league. And I saw some people talking about tanking. We should tank. We should completely strip down the Bengals roster. The one guy that they said we should keep is Jamar Chase, which is fair. I mean, fair. If you get a top 1 or 2 player at a position, there's absolutely no reason that you should get rid of them. And if there was a retool, once again, the Bengals are not going to do that. If there was a retool, then you'd want a Jamar Chase to be there for a young quarterback. And then I'd openly say that based off of what I've seen from Jamar Chase, I don't know how happy he'd be if the Bengals were losing and there was a rookie quarterback playing. But that's all a hypothetical for a time that hopefully in a universe that we never have to venture over towards. So, yeah, Jamar Chase played well. Mitchell Tinsley. What about Mitchell Tinsley? The dude pretty much garnered a roster spot off of 1 play, 2 plays in the preseason. I remember I did a post-game show. It was the Commanders game with Craig Sandlin. I was like, did Mitchell Tinsley just secure himself a roster spot? And Craig looked at me point blank and said, yes, he did. And he came up big here with one of the better catches I've seen, gets the calf down, scores the touchdown. And you'd say this about Jake Browning going forward. He's got a lot of weapons, especially in the red zone, probably more than we've ever seen this current iteration of the Bengals have. Because between Andre Yoshivas, Mitchell Tinsley, those are 2 toss it up in the back of the end zone kind of guys. They'll come down and get it. You got Gesicki that can go over the middle, and I haven't even brought up the 2 elite wide receivers we have in Jamar Chase that can do it all, and T. Higgins that's another toss it up guy. So like when we get in the red zone, in a big part of red zone play is offensive line. Like if you get behind schedule, in the red zone, obviously you're going to just play it conservatively and then just kick the field goal. Like you're not going to be trying to push it for first downs or the end zone all too often. But we've got more tools to use at Joe Burrow and Jake Browning and Zac Taylor's disposal when we get in the red zone than probably they've ever had before. Not even to mention Chase Brown. But, man, did you what was you watched the replay, so you weren't watching it live. I don't know what your fans were watching when Dalton Reisner gets called for offsides when we're on the half-inch line. It's just how does that happen? How do we do that? I mean, you just can't go off sides in that scenario. Luckily, it all worked out. When we go Jake Browning, he lifts it on over the goal line, and they win. The other thing that I did want to say is I thought the special teams yesterday, kickoffs, fantastic. Punts, fantastic. Punt return, downtown Charlie Brown Jones, probably needs to be a little quicker. Kicker returns were fantastic. So in a sport where anytime you talk about special teams play, you're probably talking about it in a negative light, I wanted to give some credit to the Bengals there. The special teams play, it's the forgotten third aspect of this sport, but when it's good, give them credit. And that's exactly what we're going to do. All right, 10:51. The Stone Shield Show will be coming up here in 10 minutes. I'm Remouse. Thank you for being here. We do have a few more things to talk about, and I did have Reds on the rundown. I don't know if you guys want – I know you guys don't want to hear me spew any single Reds take. So you know what? That's just not where we're going to go. And I think on this final 10 minutes, I'll talk about Jake Browning. And what I'll say about Jake Browning, once again, if I told you guys at the 8-minute mark of the second quarter that the Bengals' backup quarterback, Jake Browning, is going to throw 3 interceptions. By the way, 2 of those interceptions were fantastic plays by the Jacksonville Jaguars. But 3 interceptions and the Bengals would win, you would all call me nuts. You'd all call me crazy, but here we are living in that reality where Jake Browning does come in. He scores 2 in the air and scores 1 himself, but turns the ball over 3 times, and the Bengals win. And the thing about Jake Browning that I love about him, people are asking why don't the Bengals run the same offensive scheme with Jake Browning as opposed to Joe Burrow? It's pretty clear that Zac Taylor has his hands a lot more in the bowl when it comes to Jake Browning's offense, like very structured plays. This is where we're going to go on this play. This is where we're going to go. And with Joe, he's earned this right. Where you're like, hey, here's a play. You can audible whenever. You can run it as you want. There's going to be multiple options. You read the field. That's what you're a lead out. You do. You go ahead and do that. Jake, it's like, hey, we're going to get this play to Jamar Chase. And I think that was a big thing yesterday and something that we should do with Joe more often, which is, hey, Jamar Chase is an elite playmaker. Let's just get the ball to him more often. There was a play late in the fourth quarter where we didn't even run a screen. We didn't even run a screen play to Jamar Chase. We put him on an island out on the open side of the field, took the snap, threw it to him. Just man-on-man over there, took the snap, threw it to Jamar Chase. No one blocking in front of him, just got on the ball, and what happened, that play could blow up for a -3 if you don't have an elite playmaker. Luckily, Jamar Chase is an elite playmaker. He evades 1 tackle, goes for 7, 8, 9 yards. So, Jake Browning does not have a good arm. His arm strength, you saw it. Joe Burrow doesn't have a good arm, but when Jake Browning's out there, it's noticeably worse. Jake Browning's not nearly as accurate as the elite accuracy of Joe Burrow. You notice it. Several throws, you're like, come on. Hit him there, hit him there. He's not there. What he did have yesterday was a little bit of spunk. You talk about guys, obviously I played baseball, and I come from a baseball background where my dad coached, brothers, they all played, all that stuff. And you talk about pinch hitters. A trait that you want of a really good pinch hitter, for lack of a better term, is you want him to be a little bit dumb. You want him to not understand the situation that he's stepping in when you go and throw him, in the regional championship, 7th inning, you need a guy to get on base. You want the guy to just be like, oh, shucks, all right, here I go. I'll walk on out there. Hopefully throws me a good bit. Like, you want that out of players. Jake Browning played like it didn't matter. He played with some spunk. Like, he didn't play tight. He just played loose. That's part of the reason you throw 3 interceptions. That's part of the reason you just toss it up and hopefully someone comes down with it, Mitchell Tinsley. And that's where the Bengals are going to probably need to play going forward. And who knows? Maybe the Bengals win this week against Minnesota. And they're 3-0. And all of a sudden you're looking like, okay, this team might be a playoff. This team very much is in the running to be a pretty good playoff team, even with Jake Browning back there. And then things get a little tight there because it starts to weigh on you, and you don't know what you don't know. As for the fans, I already tweeted this out today, and I saw some people in the chat putting it in there. As for the fans that are like, we should go and get Jameis Winston. We should go and get Captain Kirk Cousins. What are you talking about? What? In what world are the Cincinnati Bengals going to go get one of those guys? In what world do you think the Cincinnati Bengals, and I'm not even talking about the validity of if they should or not. I'm just talking about if they are going to, and we all know they're not. They need to sign another quarterback. I don't know who it's going to be. My money is they're just going to bring back Des Ridder to be the backup guy. He's got starting experience. He looked terrible in the preseason and looked terrible throughout his starting run in Atlanta. But he played here for the Bearcats, and he's familiar with the city, and, he's got starting experience. So if Jake Browning would go down. But if Jake Browning goes down, then it's a different conversation, especially if they have a winning record, 3-0, 4-0, whatever it is. Then that's a different conversation. But, man, roll me up one of whatever you're smoking if you think the Cincinnati Bengals this week are going to go out and get Jameis Winston or Kirk Cousins or any other, maybe even make a deal with the Cleveland Browns to take Joe Flacco off their hands. Like, what are you talking about? That ain't happening. It's the same conversation that we have every single year when it comes to the trade deadline and be like, well, I think the Bengals really can make a move here. I think the Bengals really should do it. They're not going to. It's not worth the time. It's not worth the energy to talk about it. It really isn't. So we're not going to. So I just want to say, for the fans that are sitting out there, I don't mean to poke fun at you or prod at you or anything like that. I respect you just trying to find solutions. It feels like almost like if for those that are married, your wife's like, oh man, like I had a bad day, yada, yada, and you start trying to make solutions for them, and they don't want to hear that. They just want to complain. I respect you trying to make solutions for the current situation that the Bengals find themselves in. But it ain't going to happen. Like, they're just not going to go get a veteran quarterback. Unless Jake Browning goes down. Then I could see them making a move there. Especially if they won. But thank you guys so much for being here today. The Stone Shield show will be coming up here in just a few minutes. I got to rant and rave about the Cincinnati Bengals for an hour. I'll close with this. And it's a sentiment that I've said on this show several times. I opened up the show saying I didn't want to be negative, that I only wanted to be positive, or at least I wanted to start off the show by being positive. And I'll end with this. The kudos that I gave to Zac Taylor, and I'm not even going to argue with people about it. He deserves the kudos for the way that this team constantly fights and doesn't give in. I'm asking for the fans that are watching this show, that are listening to this show, maybe you talk to, your friends or your family, your dad, your cousin, whoever it is. I ask you to mirror what the Cincinnati Bengals are doing. And if we've got a shot here, we can't let it go. The Bengals are 2-0 right now. Their final 3 games are against the Miami Dolphins, the Arizona Cardinals, and the Cleveland Browns, who might go bang, bang, bang 1, 2, 3 in the NFL draft next year. So you've got to figure out a way to win over the next 12 weeks. You've got to hope that Joe Burrow is on the timeline that they say, which is about 3 months, coming back to the middle of December. And just fight. Just stay optimistic. We can revisit this whole thing in 2-3 weeks if they're lost. We can talk about it again there. But as for right now, the situation that's laid out in front of us is the Bengals are 2-0 with a soft back end of the schedule. Some very winnable games this week. In the 5-6 weeks when you're playing the New York Jets and the Chicago Bears. Against the Pittsburgh Steelers, that whole thing might blow up here in the next couple weeks. All I'm asking is that you keep hope alive, because If you don't have hope, then you're going to claw your eyes out as a Cincinnati Bengals fan. It's 11 o'clock, the Stone Shields show coming up soon. Thanks so much, Stone Shields, for being my producer. I offered him. I said, hey, I'm going to call on you a few times to talk. Do you want me to sit in the room? And he said, Reed, stay the F away from my show. I don't need you on it anytime soon. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Maybe Trace will be back off the bench. Thank you.
All right, here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shields show. I am your host, Stone Shields. Appreciate everybody hanging out for week number 2 here on a Monday, September 15th. And a very interesting victory Monday for the Cincinnati Bengals. Absolutely no doubt about that. Probably one of the darkest victory Mondays we've ever had as Cincinnati Bengals fans. But I'm going to be breaking down, obviously, what happened to quarterback 1, Joe Burrow, his toe injury, and also some other takeaways from the game, because it was a really interesting game for the Cincinnati Bengals as Reed Mouse tries to hide under our camera and get through there. There you go, Reed. Good work there. But plenty to discuss on today's show. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us here in the chat. And got plenty to discuss as well. Reed did a phenomenal job on Off the Bench this morning. He was solo. I was producing that. Trace Fowler probably will be back later in the week on Off the Bench, but we're going to have a full slate of programming this week on Off the Bench and my show as well after from 11 to noon. Certainly hope you guys can hang out throughout the entirety of the week as we discuss the Cincinnati Bengals and also a bunch of other topics around the National Football League and college football as well. So we're going to start, obviously, with the Burrow injury. We're not going to bury the lead here. We're going to discuss that at the top of today's show. A little conversation. Have the Cincinnati Bengals failed Joe Burrow? I think that's a common question lots of people are asking themselves here at this point. Of course, we're going to spend some time talking about the offensive line and the defense, and also it's Victory Monday, as I mentioned at the top, so we are going to break down exactly what transpired in that game. A crazy game, by the way. Seemingly all Cincinnati Bengals games are crazy, so I always like doing that on Monday, kind of just revisiting the game a little bit, breaking it down quarter by quarter, drive by drive, even to some extent, especially here in this game with the Jaguars, as it felt like every drive was significant, right? Whether it was a turnover, a touchdown, a field goal, a 3-and-out, what have you. Just really a wild game in week 2. Obviously, Jake Browning comes in and does his job. Got to give a little love to Zack Taylor. I know a lot of people in the comment section probably aren't exactly still happy with Zack Taylor, despite the fact that he was able to pull off a victory with his backup quarterback, but we're going to be showing him some love today on the show as well. And also, if there's some time at the end, we're going to look around the rest of the National Football League and college football if we have a little bit of time. By the way, best bets of the weekend, 3-3 for week number 1, was looking a little not the best going into Sunday, right? If anyone listened to our program on Friday, and we had 6 wagers that we said were our best bets of the weekend, went 3-3 on those, went 2-0 in the NFL on Sunday, kind of to save the weekend there. That's going to be a segment that we're going to be doing each and every week, so make sure you stick around, tune in for that. And, we're starting to see the board a little bit more clearly, and I think that certainly is a good thing. But let's start with Joe Burrow. Obviously, it's week 2, right? You're coming off the week 1 game against the Cleveland Browns, and it kind of feels like, all right, this is where the Cincinnati Bengals offense kind of locks in and really begins to do good things offensively, moves the football well, and you kind of start to see Joe Burrow, that MVP type of guy in Joe Burrow. And I think a lot of people had a lot of optimism that we would see that in week 2. I certainly did as well. 3 and out to begin the game, and then a really nice drive offensively. You go down and score a touchdown, and then obviously disaster strikes. And Reed kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier on off the bench, basically saying anytime you see Joe Burrow get hit, anytime you see that pocket collapse, anytime you see him go down, you kind of just collectively hold your breath, right? As a fan base, I think everybody does that. Reed was kind of alluding to the fact that he feels like he didn't have to do that as much. He had finally gotten over it, right? Burrow was healthy, obviously, throughout the entirety of last year. Did have the kind of scare that last game against Pittsburgh, but he ended up being just fine. That kind of neck crunch, right? In that last game of the season, he ends up being okay. And Reed said he kind of had gotten over that. I think me personally, anytime you see number 9, in duress where he's getting hit hard or he's getting wrapped up low, you kind of just hold your breath. And, right, that certainly was the case this game against Jacksonville. And the play prior to him getting hurt was a sack, right? And that one looked a lot, honestly, worse than the play where he actually hurt his toe. And then, you see him slow to get up, and then he gets up, and then he can't put any pressure on it. He takes the helmet off, he lays back, and kind of it just, your stomach drops, right, when you see that happen with Joe Burrow. And, look, we're going to talk about national storylines on my show, as I've talked about, but obviously we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. And here, as we grow the show, I don't have a problem admitting, right, that I am a Cincinnati Bengals fan, right? That's just kind of the reality of the situation. And I'll be honest with you, currently 24 years of age. When I was a kid growing up, I probably was a little bit too attached to the Cincinnati Bengals as far as, my personality kind of really depended on if they won or lost games. If they lost, I would kind of hold on to it for probably a little bit too long. Certainly on Sunday, if they lost, I was kind of in shambles throughout the rest of the day, right? And as I've gotten older and matured, I've finally been able to move past that a little bit. Do I get ticked off or frustrated when they don't play up to the standard that I believe they should play at? Sure, but at the end of the day, we're fans, right? Life goes on. It's just football. But there's one thing that can happen that can really just absolutely depress you as a Bengals fan, and unfortunately, we saw that yesterday. The Bengals could have lost yesterday 70-0. And they could have went up against Minnesota and, again, lost 70-0. And we would have been ticked off. We would have been frustrated. We would have been embarrassed. We would have been mad. We would have been complaining. We would have been in shambles. But at the end of the day, everything would go on just fine, and we would continue with the season. And then Joe Burrow gets hurt, right? That's just, as a Bengals fan, that absolutely kills you. It makes you depressed. It makes you sad. It makes you frustrated. And just the fact that you don't get to watch Joe Burrow play for a couple of months at minimum, right? The Bengals had their frustrations over the past couple of years, didn't win as many games as they should, but kind of my takeaway was we get to see number 9 go out there and play quarterback. This is a true once-in-a-lifetime type of talent. The Tom Brady's of the world, the Peyton Mannings of the world. Yeah, there's one of those guys, and he's here in Cincinnati, and his name is Joe Burrow. And regardless of the success or lack thereof that this team has, you get to watch him go out there and play. And when that gets taken away as a fan, obviously that is incredibly depressing, and that's kind of where we're all at right now. I can't even imagine, obviously, being Joe himself, how he feels, right? He probably feels like, he puts all this work in. He does everything he can to be at the top of his game. He finally has a off season where it kind of goes perfectly, right? He's healthy. He plays in the preseason. He gets through that. And then here in week 2, he basically immediately gets hurt here in this 2025 season. And obviously, that is something that is very, very difficult to stomach for the Cincinnati Bengals. That's really a worst-case scenario, right? You could lose 5 games in a row, but if he's still out there, it's like, it is what it is. You lose number 9, and ultimately everything kind of falls apart from there, right? Are you a Super Bowl contender without Joe Burrow? No. All right, but luckily for the Cincinnati Bengals, you're in a spot where maybe you can still stay afloat for long enough with Jake Browning at the helm to perhaps puts you in a situation where you can get to the postseason. And, the report this morning, there's, reports, obviously, as you kind of look at the time frame of this. He goes down, and then you're kind of holding your breath like, oh, my goodness, is this an Achilles, right? That's kind of worst-case scenario there, is if it's an Achilles, and obviously he's out for the rest of the year, and then that's going to certainly affect his offseason there as well. It's not an Achilles, so you kind of hold your breath there, and then you're like, well, is it an ankle? Is it a foot? Could this be something that's a 4 to 6 week injury? And if you go back and watch the replay, he points directly to his toe. When he goes down and the training staff kind of comes out. And then, you're breaking down the potential situations that could happen with a toe injury, right? Is it, a dislocated toe, something where you can, pop back in and be good to come back? Something where it's a broken toe where you might have to miss a game or two, but perhaps a situation where you could work through it and play through it? Or is it, in fact, turf toe, right? And it's funny because you hear the injury turf toe. And you're like, oh, that can't be that bad, right? Turf toe, that kind of sounds like a rug burn, right? That can't be that bad. Well, the reality of the situation is turf toe is awful, and it's a grade 3 turf toe. So, a grade 1 turf toe, you're in a situation where you probably can play through it. It's going to be painful, but you can probably manage it, especially as an NFL caliber athlete. Then you kind of got the grade 2 range, right? Kind of what Brock Purdy's dealing with, where it's like, yeah, you don't need surgery, but it's going to cost you some time. You can't put weight on it. You're using the crutches. It's going to take you 4 to 6 weeks, what have you. Or you're in a situation where it's a grade 3 turf toe and you're going to need surgery. And obviously, we found out this morning that is, in fact, what Joe Burrow has. And it was interesting because I actually was talking with some buddies the night prior on Saturday night about turf toe, and we were having kind of that same conversation because we were, talking about the Brock Purdy injury, and we're like, why is it called turf toe? Like, that's just the silliest thing in the world, that some serious toe injury is just called turf toe. And then, of course, it happens to Joe Burrow the very next day. But grade 3 is the situation there. So kind of there's the ebbs and flows of, you're checking your phone for the update. Oh, my goodness, what is it? Okay, it's a toe. How long is he going to be out? And we still don't have full clarity on that as of right now. Zac Taylor will take the podium in a matter of hours. He's going to shed some more light onto that. Also, Shamar Stewart is hurt. He's probably week to week, it feels like. He'll have an update on that later today as well, so make sure you check our social media pages for updates on that. And also, Cincinnati's going to bring in a veteran, right? Reed alluded to this on Off the Bench. They're not going to bring in some guy that's going to start, right? But Jake Browning needs a backup, and I think there's going to be a plan in place where they bring somebody in that isn't just Brett Ripien being elevated from the practice squad. But you're kind of in a spot right now where you don't know exactly how long this is going to take. 3 months has been the time frame that has been floated out as it relates to Joe Burrow and this toe injury. Could he come back before that? Possibility. Could he come back after that or not come back at all? Certainly a possibility there as well, and it's going to be a kind of wait-and-see thing. I would be shocked if Zac Taylor put a target date on it when he addresses the media today at his press conference. It's probably going to be a situation where, Joe's going to need surgery. He's going to get the surgery as quickly as possible, and we'll go from there with Jake Browning as the quarterback. Anything beyond that answer from Zac Taylor probably would surprise me, but he'll take the podium later today, and obviously we will find out. So the question becomes, can this team stay afloat before Joe Burrow possibly gets back? And I want to be very clear. This team still has a chance. If Joe Burrow can return, this team still has a chance, and 2025 isn't completely dead. Now, yesterday, it's tough. You had a night to sleep on it. You feel a little bit better now, right, even after understanding that he's going to need the surgery. But I think yesterday it kind of felt like it was over. It was ruined. The season was done. It was cooked. No more Joe Burrow for the rest of the year. Apparently, there's still a possibility that he could come back. So we're going to spend some time in a little bit breaking down Jake Browning and breaking down the schedule throughout the rest of the season over the next 3 months before Joe Burrow, in theory, could return. Again, Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, some local people throwing around that 3-month time frame. We will see. But the biggest question now when people are talking about Joe Burrow is, one, the injury-prone comment, right, which is frustrating for all of us, myself included, and also the comment of, has the organization failed Joe Burrow? That's something that when you flip on the TV nationally and people are talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, make no mistake, if national people are talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, they're talking about Joe Burrow and his injury history and kind of if the organization has failed him. That's what the narrative is going to be nationally over the course of certainly this week, the next couple of months, and into the offseason as well. And that certainly is something that is very very frustrating for those of us that kind of take in content from the national media. When they're talking about Cincinnati, it's all going to be negative. They're going to be banging on, the organization and the coaching staff for putting him in a spot where he's behind all these bad offensive lines, and certainly the fact that, he is injury prone, right? And unfortunately, the answer to those two questions right now are yes. And the questions are, is Joe Burrow injury prone? And as the organization failed Joe Burrow? And the reality of the situation is, yes, they have absolutely failed Joe Burrow. Adam Schefter tweeted this out earlier today. Burrow's rookie season, obviously, was in 2020. And, there's different metrics and stats you could use to evaluate offensive line performance. But pass block win rate is probably the best one to use when you can consider protecting a quarterback, right? Avoiding a quarterback from, stepping into harm's way, right? Pass block win rate is probably the metric to look at. Not, blocking for, run blocking, right? That doesn't, do much. When the quarterback is dropping back to pass, how are you doing as far as your pass protection? In 2020, when Joe Burrow was a rookie, 29th in the National Football League. 2021, when Joe Burrow led the team to a Super Bowl after the serious knee injury in which he suffered, 30th. 2022, when the Bengals went back to the AFC Championship game, 30th. Let me be very clear. There are 32 teams in the NFL, and the Bengals went 29, 30, 30 in his first 3 years. 2023, 27th. All right, of course, he got hurt that year with the wrist. 2024, 32nd. All right, again, there's 32 teams in the NFL. Last year, they were 32nd, and we viewed, myself included, as the 2024 offensive line, the best offensive line that Joe Burrow had, and they were last in the National Football League in pass block win rate, and this year, through 2 games, they're 28th, right? Now, that's just a failure by the organization. Now, I want to be clear, it's not something that they haven't tried to address. The Bengals very clearly have tried to address the offensive line. They bring in Frank Pollock a couple of years ago. He's supposed to be some guy that knows how to coach the offensive line. That clearly did not work. Zac Taylor understood that, said, Frank, sorry, we got to go our separate ways. We got to fire you. We got to bring in a new guy, Scott Peters. This is his first year here in Cincinnati. First couple of weeks hasn't been much better than what Frank Pollock had to offer. Draft picks. They've allocated top-of-the-line resources to their offensive line. Obviously, Amarius Mims is a number 1 pick, right, in the first round. Dylan Fairchild this past year, he's a 3rd-round pick, right? Even Cordell Volson as a 4th-round pick, dedicated a draft, pick to him. OBJ, he had a lot of success in Baltimore and Kansas City. You brought him in, paid him a lot of money in free agency, something as an organization you don't do, particularly along the offensive line. You brought in OBJ to be your bookend left tackle. He's been good in spots, but he's also been hurt in spots, and he also has been bad in spots. And the first 2 games this year, Orlando Brown Jr., granted he was dealing with Myles Garrett in week 1, but he was flat out bad, right? You've addressed it in free agency over the course of a couple of years, right? Ted Karras, he's worked out at center. That's been really nice, right? But bringing in Alex Kappa at center, right? That clearly didn't work out. He tried to run that for a couple of years. He was one of the worst offensive linemen when it came to pass block win rate. He ends up leaving for Las Vegas, right? And then you bring in Lucas Patrick, who I think that's probably the most frustrating one, right? Because you didn't address it early in free agency. You did it at the very end, and you were basically like, oh, yeah, he's going to be our left guard. Yeah, he's going to start for us and protect Joe Burrow, and we kind of just signed him at the end of free agency when he's a guy that's been a journeyman throughout his career to the NFL to this point and hasn't ever really been looked at as a viable starter, but we're going to look at him as a viable starter. But the point being, you've tried, right? You've brought in new personnel. You've changed the coaching a little bit as well, and it clearly has not been better, and unfortunately for the Cincinnati Bengals, that is an indictment upon them as an organization that they cannot figure out the offensive line. Now, is there a direct line towards their performance and Joe Burrow's injury-prone nature? I don't know, but I think it's a safe bet. You have to say it, right? Because he's been hurt so many different times, and I think you have to look at the protection as the number 1 reason why. Play style certainly impacts it as well. Joe Burrow holds the football. We know that. And really, if you didn't think that was obvious, well, did you watch the second half with Jake Browning? Clearly different in terms of holding on to the football than Joe Burrow. But that's what makes him great. That's his style of play. He's always done that. And where does Joe Burrow rank among NFL quarterbacks if he totally changes his game and doesn't do that? Is he even a top-of-the-line quarterback if he doesn't have that element to his game? I don't know. We'll see if he has to pivot how he plays after yet another serious injury here for Joe Burrow. And then that second question. So clearly the organization has failed him. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. Now, people will take it over the top and they'll say, oh, he's the next Andrew Luck. He's got a couple of more years left before he calls it quits. That's not going to happen. I would be shocked, right? But the narrative that the Bengals didn't at least try to protect him, that's incorrect. They tried, but they failed because they haven't been able to get that offensive line figured out throughout the entirety of his career. Again, coupled a little bit with his playing style, holding on to the football, trying to extend plays, and just the playing style that Cincinnati has, where so often they're in obvious passing situations where even if they're, in a close game, the defense knows they're not running the ball. They're throwing it with number 9 because they've got all the weaponry that we have. So based on the playing style of the team, the just overall philosophy of the football team, and, Joe Burrow, how he plays, and obviously with the offensive line and the troubles that they have had, that has created these injuries for Joe Burrow. And, the second part, the first part was, has the organization failed him? The answer to that question is yes. The second part is he injury prone? That phrase, injury prone, that kind of makes my skin crawl a little bit. It frustrates me, right? Because it's nothing Joe can do about it, right? It's just kind of, he's gotten hurt. These aren't situations where it's like, oh, he, jammed his finger, he's going to miss a ton of games. No, these are serious injuries that he has suffered that hasn't allowed him to go out there and play football games. Again, if he's in a spot where, he rolls his ankle, oh, he misses a game or two, okay, fine, right? Or, he sprained his knee, he's only out for a couple of games. No, seemingly when Joe Burrow gets hurt, he's not in a position where he misses a couple of games. It really ends his season. Now, there's also other injuries that haven't been documented that he has that he plays through, so maybe he's just constantly hurt, and there's a lot of stuff he can play through, and that's why, really if he's missing games, he's missing large chunks of the season as opposed to just a game or two. But when we break this down, he's been in the NFL. This is year 6 for Joe Burrow, and this is just kind of where we're at. Remember, he had that injury at Ohio State, too, where he broke his hand, and that really caused him to lose that quarterback battle with Dwayne Haskins. That doesn't happen. Probably doesn't end up going to LSU, and then who knows, what Joe Burrow is if he doesn't go to LSU. Probably, certainly not the quarterback here in Cincinnati, but there's one injury, right, with the hand at Ohio State, and then his rookie year, the knee. And something about these injuries, too, is they're unprecedented. These 3 that we'll really talk about in detail here, he didn't just tear his ACL. Right, he tore his ACL, his MCL, his PCL, and his meniscus all in the same play. His knee was ruined on that play against the Washington Commanders, or the Washington football team maybe, in his rookie year. Just completely ruined, right? You've seen quarterbacks tear their ACL or tear their meniscus, but all in one, pretty serious injury. In 2021, obviously, it was the Super Bowl year. If you remember, he dislocated his pinky that season. He was able to play through it, so that certainly was good. And then he sprained his knee in the Super Bowl, but was able to play through that as well. But, just more bumps and bruises for Joe Burrow. Throughout that season. And then in 2023, obviously had the calf strain that happened right at the beginning of training camp, caused him to miss camp. They kind of probably rushed it a little bit, right? When he came back and played week 1 against Cleveland, couldn't move around at all, and it was a really, really slow start for Cincinnati that year. And then later, he eventually was able to get back to, typical Joe Burrow performance without missing games to that point, mind you. And then obviously had the wrist injury on Thursday Night Football in Baltimore, and that was, NFL quarterbacks, there was no history of that injury happening, right? It was just a very fluky thing for an NFL quarterback to have to endure. And similar here with his toe injury, right? We talked about it a little bit on Off the Bench. Yeah, people get turf toes all the time, but usually it's a grade 1 or a 2, not a grade 3. Mahomes had one a couple of years ago that he was able to play through and was able to push the surgery off until after the season. But a turf toe situation for a quarterback where he has to, miss up to 3 months, obviously that is something that is pretty unprecedented, and that's something that Joe Burrow will have to deal with, obviously now as we progress. So, 2 situations there. The Bengals clearly have failed him, right, to this point. And I'm someone that sticks up for the Bengals organization more than lots of other people. Clearly they have failed him, right? Is there a direct correlation between his injuries and the lack of protection? I don't know, but, the reality is he's missed a ton of games because he's been hurt, and he gets sacked all the time, and he gets hit all the time. I would think that those 2 things kind of travel in the same direction as one another and align with one another and, heavily correlate between the 2 as well. So that's kind of where we're at with Joe Burrow. We'll see. Again, 3 months is what is being thrown out here at this point. And, we'll see if he ends up coming back this season or if we will not see Joe Burrow for 2026. But let's talk about, before we just dive into the nuts and bolts of what actually transpired in the football game, let's talk about, where Cincinnati could be at here. And there's a reason to be optimistic. One, because you're 2-0, right? Because, we're kind of in a spot here where it feels like, the season might be over. Everyone's angry, frustrated, sad, depressed. You have all these emotions. Bengals have yet to lose a football game yet, right? They're 2-0. And certainly I would argue they've been gifted both games, right? I didn't watch the game live yesterday because we were doing our Chatterbox Championship at Stone Lake Hills. Can't tell you who won that yet, but that certainly was very exciting. Those videos will go out on YouTube in the coming weeks and months. But I was able to get home late last night and watch the game at night. And, you're watching the game. The injury happens. Obviously, that's very disappointing, very frustrating, very sad. But then I was kind of in a spot where it's like I just don't even want to look at anything, right? You're just kind of out of it. You're like, I just don't even really – I don't care at this point. He's hurt again. Goodness gracious, we're in shambles. And then you wake up today and you're like, okay, all right, he's getting the surgery, right? He's going to be out for a couple of months. Let's just see where this team can go. You're 2-0 right now. All right, you're 2-0 right now, and the time frame that's been thrown around by some people, Schefter, Rappaport, national NFL people. I don't know what necessarily doctors have said, so to speak, but that 3-month time frame is what's being thrown out right now. The game happened on September 14th, obviously. Today's the 15th. 3 months from that point is a game against the Baltimore Ravens on December 14th, and that would be the fourth to last game of the year. So 3 months from yesterday would be home against Baltimore, and then on the road against Miami, home against Arizona, home against Cleveland. Let me just say, if Joe Burrow returns on December 14th and this Cincinnati Bengals team is alive, and not in a situation where it's like, oh, they need to win out, and then all those guys need to lose, and then, oh, the team that's number 1 seed and they're playing all their backups, they got to win the last week too. No. If they're in a situation where they're actually alive and have real life, and he comes back against Lamar Jackson at home on December 14th, that will be one of the most memorable games we have ever seen. To be very clear, if Joe Burrow makes a return against the Baltimore Ravens on December 14th, and the Bengals are alive, that would be just chills. And seeing him run out, it would just be the craziest thing of all time. It would be absolutely awesome. But a lot needs to go right in order to get to that point. You break down this schedule. We've talked about it at length. I was talking with a buddy earlier this morning, and you played Minnesota on the road. Has there ever been a must-win game for a team that's 2-0? No, there hasn't. One. Is this necessarily a must-win? Probably not, but it kind of feels like it a little bit, right? Because you have the better quarterback, by the way. Give me Jake Browning over J.J. McCarthy every single day. That's not hyperbolic. That's just the truth, right? He's been awful through his first 2 games in the National Football League. Certainly has a lot of help with his coaching. Kevin O'Connell's going to put him in a fine situation. You could argue Brian Flores is the best defensive coordinator in the National Football League. The Bengals are going to have their hands full, no doubt. But give me Jake Browning over J.J. McCarthy in that game. You're 2-0 right now. Can you win next week? And then you got a gauntlet, right? Denver. On the road, Detroit at home, Green Bay at Lambeau, Pittsburgh twice, right? They're going to be a problem. Obviously, they lost to Seattle, but they're going to cause issues for you, especially with Jake Browning at quarterback. Got a couple potential layups. They were layups with Joe Burrow. Probably not layups anymore, but you got the Jets and you got the Bears. And then, as we alluded to, the end of the season, past the 3-month time frame where Joe Burrow theoretically could be back, Miami, Arizona, Cleveland to end the season. So there is a path for Cincinnati to still have life. And it's frustrating because, they go to the Super Bowl in 21, and I think a lot of us are sitting there thinking, oh, they're going to rattle off tons of wins. They're going to rattle off playoff wins. They're going to be in the Super Bowl every couple of years. They're going to win Lombardi trophies. It's going to be awesome. And then they get back to the AFC Championship the next year after a slow start. And then next thing you know, years are going by, and you're not winning football games. And shoot, you're not making the postseason, and you're not even thinking about the number 1 seed, right? Remember when they went to the Super Bowl? It's like, we just got to get back. We got to get that number 1 seed, right? We got to get the home field advantage throughout. Where you haven't even sniffed the potential number 1 seed, and you certainly aren't going to sniff it again this year without Joe Burrow. So you're kind of in a spot again, despite the fact that you're 2-0, and despite the fact that all these things went right for you this offseason, where you're already doing the math game here on September 15th, where you're like, we're probably going to lose that game without Joe Burrow. All right, he's probably going to get back here at this point, and I think a lot of people as Bengals fans are just sick of doing math this early in the year where it's like, probably lose here. He might come back at this point, and okay, if we win that. Like, it's just, all the, guessing that you're doing is very frustrating, but just kind of the reality of being a Cincinnati Bengals fan here at this point. There are ways for this football team to win with Jake Browning. Are there ways for them to be elite in the AFC? No. Are there ways for them to win the AFC North? No. I don't think there's a way that they can win the AFC North here at this point. But we saw how Zac Taylor changed his offense in the second half, something that, as we'll get into as the show progresses, Zac Taylor deserves a lot of credit for, right? The offense looked totally different in the second half with Jake Browning at the helm than it did with Joe Burrow. And I think you could argue that it was borderline better. Right? Joe Burrow, it's a lot of spread it out, a lot of empty set, a lot of 5-step drop, right? With Jake Browning, it was a lot of 3-step drops, getting the ball out of his hands a lot quicker, and, a lot of Chase Brown. And these things are going to have to happen. Jake Browning, he has that chip on his shoulder. Maybe he has that clutch gene. I mean, he got the PI gift yesterday, but he still was able to march him down the field after 3 turnovers, right? After all that adversity and win. So maybe he's got the clutch gene, so that's certainly is something that is very, very, appealing or promising, right, if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. But you still have T. Higgins. You still have Jamar Chase. You still have Chase Brown. Mitchell Tinsley has kind of burst on the scene. Only 1 catch yesterday, but it was unbelievable. So he's got pieces around him. We're going to find out, exactly how good Zac Taylor can do. Because Jake Browning was 4-3 as a starter in 2023. And I think that's really kind of what Zac Taylor, as far as his career as a Cincinnati Bengals head coach, he's got all the playoff wins, but he can really hang his hat on, we lost Burrow and we still were over 500 and had a chance to get in the postseason a couple of years ago. Now you find yourself in a very similar situation, but Browning, of course, is going to have to play more than 7 games here in order to keep things on the rails for the Cincinnati Bengals football team. So there's ways to do it. All right, there's reason to be optimistic that they can be alive. Again, you've got the 2-0 start. If you're 0-2, cooked. If you're 1-1, borderline cooked. You're 2-0. You haven't lost a game yet, right? So there's still chances to put some things together. Your defense, they're clearly better than last year. They took a step in the wrong direction as far as I'm concerned from week 1 to week 2, but they're clearly better than last year. Jamar, T, all those guys are healthy right now. I've always been a believer in Zac Taylor, Dan Pitcher, what they can do offensively. So there is still a chance for this football team as we progress. And again, if Burrow's out there for the Baltimore game, or even if it's the week after that, which is on the road at Miami, but if he comes back and you're in a position where you're alive, it's going to be absolutely awesome, and it's going to be worth the wait, right? Do I have, concerns on whether or not he's going to be able to come back? Sure, I do. Do I have concerns as far as whether or not this team's going to be alive by the time he could potentially come back? Yes, of course, I do. But it's going to be a heck of a lot of fun. And I know I've been, Shields, he's such a glass half full Mr. Optimism guy. Fair, all right? But, he hasn't been ruled out for the year yet. And there's reason to be optimistic, especially with the 2-0 record that you currently possess. All right, let's talk a little bit about the game. So there's Joe Burrow, the injury, kind of what you're up against here throughout the rest of the season. But let's talk about the game itself, because it was a wild game, as seemingly all Cincinnati Bengals games are, and certainly this one no different. But you kind of came into the game. Obviously, you needed a lot of improvement offensively, and you needed to pick up more first downs. You needed to have more success moving the football, and you needed to kind of build off what you did defensively the first go-around in Week 1 against the Cleveland Browns. Defensively, drive 1 for Jacksonville. Interesting, right, that they elect to take the ball. I think you're kind of seeing a shift, by the way, in NFL teams doing that. It seemingly was always, you won the toss, you're going to defer. That's just kind of the way it was. But you're seeing more and more teams take the opening kickoff and potentially do damage with it. And I think Jacksonville certainly was able to do that. Went right through the Cincinnati Bengals defense. A couple of key third downs early in that game. The 3rd and 3 on the first drive, 18 yards to Dyami Brown on DJ Turner, right? The 3rd and 7 to Strange, and then obviously the touchdown to Brown as well with DJ Turner in coverage. DJ Turner did not have his best game. But, he's kind of, at least the way the game played out, is looked at as cornerback 2 after the struggles that Cam Taylor-Britt had in week 1. When they would go to 3 linebackers, CTB was out and DJ Turner was still in. So that's kind of how the coaching staff went into that game, viewing DJ Turner as their second cornerback. But I thought Cam Taylor-Britt played really well in this game. Nobody's really talking about that. Obviously, everyone's talking about the injury to Burrow, what have you. But I thought Cam Taylor-Britt was really, really good. He had a PBU in the end zone. And really, at the end of the half, you remember there was like 14 seconds left at the end of the first half, and Lawrence threw one up deep. And if it would have been caught, it would have been in field goal range. And then it was a beautiful PBU by Cam Taylor-Britt that really kind of gave Cincinnati some momentum going into the halftime. Because, if you score and then you give up a field goal right before, you're kind of just like, But they were able to get that stop after the one play, and that was a big play there by Cam Taylor-Britt. But the biggest thing that first drive for Jacksonville is Lawrence was so comfortable. And that's something that the Bengals they have struggled with, and they're going to continue to struggle with. Now, luckily Trey Hendrickson made several plays in the game where we're not sitting there talking about, they couldn't get pressure on the quarterback, that's why they lost. Hendrickson was able to save them in that regard once again. But, the pass rush there early in the game, Lawrence was just sitting back and could do whatever he wanted. And then the first drive for Cincinnati was a disaster, right? Because, kind of picked up exactly where you left off against Cleveland. There was 2 throws in the game where there were incomplete passes, but Burrow, before he got hurt, went after the ball just in case it was a fumble. You had that immediately. It was a second play offensively for Cincinnati after you ran it up the middle and didn't get anything. Liam Cohen challenged it, which was kind of a silly challenge there early. Obviously, he's a rookie head coach, but then, you get sacked the play after that. So just total incompetence on that first drive for Cincinnati. And real quick on Liam Cohen, Jacksonville, they might be okay. They might be formidable as far as opponent in the AFC. Are they going to make playoffs, win playoff games? I'm not going to get carried away, but Jacksonville is very, very interesting because I think from a play call perspective, there was some really good stuff that you saw from Liam Cohen. He was putting himself in a position where it was easy completions for Trevor Lawrence. He had schemed a lot of guys open, but Jacksonville just continually shot themselves in the foot, as we'll get into, and that really is why Cincinnati ended up winning the game. But overall, I was pretty impressed with Liam Cohen. Did have that kind of spat at the end of the game where he was kind of motioning to Trevor Lawrence, like, hey, hit him in the chest. I don't need to see that from my head coach. Like, to be a little more calm, especially in those types of big situations. And Trevor Lawrence kind of gave him one of those, which, that probably isn't great for Jacksonville. But I kind of was thinking the same thing as Trevor Lawrence there. Like, you're the head coach, man, and you're having an attack here on the sideline right before we're going into the most critical part of the game. So that was kind of interesting. But as far as a play caller, I think Liam Cohen is really solid. And I think Jacksonville is going to be certainly a lot better than they have been in previous years. But, you do the 3-and-out offensively, and then you're like, oh, boy, here we go again. And then Jacksonville continues to move the ball down the field on their second drive. Really no issues whatsoever there. Bashal Tootin, right, their rookie running back out of Virginia Tech. This is a guy that was the fastest running back in the 2025 NFL draft. It was like a 4.33 guy, and he absolutely is a burner. There was an opportunity there for B.J. Hill to make a tackle in the backfield, and it ended up being a screen play for like 24 yards. Overall, the tackling has been good for Cincinnati. It wasn't as good as it was in week 1 against Cleveland, but that certainly was an opportunity there for B.J. Hill to make a play. He wasn't able to do it. Parker Washington got involved in that drive for Jacksonville. DJ Turner again beat. So, you certainly have concerns there at that cornerback spot, particularly in the first half. DJ Turner did not have his best game. As I mentioned on that drive, you had CTB that had the PBU in the end zone, and then, of course, Trey Hendrickson makes the play of the game at that point. The get-off on that play there on third down was absolutely unbelievable. He got to Trevor Lawrence like that, and obviously Lawrence gets hit, isn't able to put enough juice on the ball to get it there. Easy interception for Dax Hill. And then Cincinnati's in a spot where it's like, it felt like we might got blown out of our own stadium right after Zac Taylor was like, get here early, be loud, and we might just be down 14-0. Here in the first quarter, Trey Hendrickson makes a huge play. I said this on Off the Bench. I will say it again. The Cincinnati Bengals are 0-2 without Trey Hendrickson. You can say what you want about Hendrickson, how he handled things this offseason. I certainly thought the Bengals went about it the right way. I didn't think he was in a spot where he deserved top-of-the-line money and guaranteed money down the line just with his age and some of the concerns you have with him in the run game. If the Bengals would have ticked him off and didn't give him that raise, and he would have sat out a couple of games, they'd be 0-2, and then you'd be without Joe Burrow, and you'd be in a spot where even if you paid Trey Hendrickson going into, like, for instance, next week in week 3, it wouldn't be enough. You'd be cooked. So the Bengals deserve a lot of props for getting things done with Trey Hendrickson. Obviously, it wasn't a long-term deal, but they pay him, and he's the reason you have a 2-0 record right now because you were 0-2 without Trey Hendrickson. And then the second drive, this is what kind of, this really just kind of hits you in the heart, to be honest with you. It was that second drive with Burrow was so good. That was so unbelievable. Even the throw there on the first throw to Jamar where, he bobbled it. It was great coverage by Jerry Jones there on the boundary. Just a perfect throw from Joe Burrow. Chase Brown was getting going, when Burrow was rolling out to his right and he hit Fant for a big play. Unbelievable. The 3rd and 4, he stepped up in the pocket and, evaded the rush, got it to Jamar. Just unbelievable. And then, you had the kind of what I alluded to earlier where he had the one play where I think he thought his receiver was going to stop and he went to throw and then he realized he wasn't, tried to hold on to it. Then he ended up running after it thinking it could perhaps be a fumble. That, too, was ruled an incompletion. And even, the touchdown play where clearly there was one play that was called and you could, see Burrow processing this. And he was like, oh, wait, nope, we need to get out of this. And we're going to have a one-on-one with Jamar, a slant. We're going to switch to that. Gets the ball. Jags bring pressure. He finds Jamar in the end zone. Just beautiful. That drive was beautiful, and that was you're kind of in a spot where it's like, oh, yep, here we go. Yep, Bengals are back. We're going to score points, and might be a shootout, but the offense is going to be just fine. And then obviously the next offensive possession happens when you get to the second half. The third drive for Jacksonville, they scored again, mind you. So really, it should be 21-7 here at this point. Jacksonville was running it well. You really saw some good stuff there from Liam Cohen on that particular drive. Bashal Tootin, the running back, as we already mentioned, he was in a spot where he was kind of one-on-one with Cam Sample. It was a backup edge, obviously, and that was just a complete mismatch there, and he looked really silly. A nice juke there from Tootin as they extended their lead at that point to 14-7, and then, disaster obviously struck. The following drive for Cincinnati, again, he was sacked the play before. Also, that 3rd and 7 to Higgins a couple plays before he got hurt. Just gorgeous. Those two being on the same page. And that's also something that you're going to see. And you saw it later in the game. You saw it in the second half where, when you see a quarterback, what you saw in the second half where Browning throws it to either T and Jamar, and you're just like, they're just not on the same page. Like how is that possible? Because that never happens when Joe is throwing to T or Jamar. They're always on the same page. They always know where to look, when to look, where it's coming, and it's always seemingly there. But so that just kind of another dagger to the heart, so to speak, because it was a great play a couple of plays before he got hurt. Obviously, he goes down, then you punt, and then you're just in survival mode, right? You're at this point in the second quarter as a fan, you're just in shambles. The stadium had gone silent, right? You could even tell watching it on TV. But everyone was in shambles, but I tell you who wasn't. It was Zac Taylor, and we'll continue to talk about that here after we finish recapping the game. But the next drive was huge, right? The next drive was absolutely huge because the injury happens, and they kept playing, right? The special teams kept playing. How about Taj Brooks running down the field and making that tackle on the punt right after Joe Burrow got hurt? You had the 3rd down, and, Jordan Battle again, right? Jordan Battle was looked at as a guy on this defense that really needed to have a big year here in 2025. He really needed to take that step in the right direction. He had issues at training camp. People were kind of picking apart, his play, his tackling ability, lack thereof, his, inability to create turnovers, right? Well, how about Jordan Battle? He's been incredible as a tackler, and another incredible interception. That wasn't an easy interception, right? Again, off the deflection, elite reaction timing, and he's able to pick off Trevor Lawrence there. Huge, right? Especially after that injury happens. Just absolutely huge that you were able to translate that 2 points. Again, it felt like Brian Thomas Jr. kind of stopped his route. So not fully on Trevor Lawrence there because he didn't really want to go over the middle. It gets deflected, and then obviously Jordan Battle makes the play. Cody Ford, Amarius Mims was checked out in that game as well. Cody Ford came in. That was a disaster when he was lined up at right tackle. Trayvon Walker was able to get a sack on Jake Browning, just a completely non-competitive rep from Cody Ford, which, again, he was sitting on the bench, and he comes in that spot against a guy that was the former number 1 overall pick in Trayvon Walker. I get it, but that was bad. But you're able to get the chunk to Jamar there on 3rd and long, kind of get it in field goal range. And it's a big kick to be able to execute there in that situation and make the kick. And, Jacksonville obviously was able to respond after that and come up with another field goal. And, the chunk plays, you kind of gave them up there throughout the course of really that first half. There was a missed tackle by Dax Hill, who I thought was incredible in the game, but he had some issues there on that particular drive, the 5th drive of the game for Jacksonville. And then, really the thing about the Jaguars about that game was they kept shooting themselves in the foot, right? How many procedural penalties did they have? Operational penalties, illegal shifts, false starts. I get it. It's a new system, right? New head coach, new scheme with Liam Cohen. And also, I don't want to kill Trevor Lawrence either because it's his 3rd offensive system in 5 years, all right? That's not the best way to help a young quarterback out, certainly, right? But, those penalties kind of allowed Cincinnati to stay in the game, right? They probably go down and score a touchdown there on that drive and kind of respond right away to the field goal that you were able to kick. But you get fortunate there, with some of the mistakes that Jacksonville made. And also, if you remember on that drive, Trevor Lawrence was like 4 yards past the line of scrimmage where he threw it in the end zone, and then he was all ticked off that he didn't get the PI, but PI doesn't matter if it's an illegal forward pass. So that was a critical mistake there from Trevor Lawrence. He made several of them, and Cincinnati was able to capitalize and force the field goal. And then after that, this was the interception with Browning where Zac Taylor didn't really kill him for it. You got a nice return from Samaje Perine, which was interesting to me. The returning. I was thinking that Charlie Jones was always going to be the kickoff return guy. In this game, it was all Samaje Perine as far as the kick return and all Charlie Jones as far as the punt return. The first drive of the second half where Perine got the kick and nearly just gave it to Jacksonville, that certainly wasn't very good. But he did have some quality returns throughout the course of the ball game, so that's fine. Early, and you saw, right, even when the Bengals were struggling on the drives in which Browning threw interceptions, they were getting it to Jamar early, right? I mean, Jamar was absurd in this game. And, that's something that certainly is very, very positive and something that they're going to continue to have. Fingers crossed, should everything be all right with Jamar Chase, but 14 receptions, 165 yards and a touchdown. That's what they need to do with Jake Browning, right? A lot of the wide receiver screen stuff where it's like, let's get him some blockers, let's get him the ball right here, right now, and see what he can do. That's kind of, without Joe Burrow, what you need to do offensively in order to put yourself in a position where you can go out there and still be competitive, especially against some really, really good football teams. But he throws the first pick there. Yoshi stopped his route. Clearly the two not on the same page. Again, something you don't really see with Joe Burrow, but Zac Taylor defended him and said that wasn't his fault at all. That tells me it was Yoshi's fault, which he hasn't had the best start here to this 2025 season. Will be interesting to see how much longer it takes for Mitchell Tinsley to perhaps go from that guy that is, ahead of Jermaine Burton to just keep climbing ahead of guys. You might look down and he might be wide receiver 3 here in a matter of time. That's just kind of, where things are at right now. But, you were going to go get points there again, and then you throw the interception. That's not good. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with 30 seconds left, Liam Cohen was still being aggressive. Cam Taylor-Britt made a really nice play. We talked about one of our keys to victory for Cincinnati. It was our last one. It was just like Cam Taylor-Britt's got to play better, right? And, he was off the field a little bit. He sat a couple of snaps out. I don't want to make it look like, he was a rotational guy. He just came out when the Bengals were operating with 3 linebackers. But, he didn't. He played a lot better than he did against the Cleveland Browns. Then you go into halftime, right? You're in a situation where you're still in the ball game. I think at that point, watching live, you're kind of wondering, are we going to see number 9 run out the tunnel and play in the second half? To me, once... it wasn't like he just walked to the locker room, right? He was trying to walk to the locker room, and then he needed the assistance. If you can't put weight on it, he probably wasn't coming back, and obviously he didn't end up coming back. But how about that drive? Immediately responding for Cincinnati right when they get the ball to begin the third quarter. As I talked about, Perine nearly cost you, right, on the kick. It just hits him right in the chest and starts rolling towards Jaguar special teamers, but he was somehow able to get on the football. He, by the way, has some good speed and burst for a guy that's certainly getting up there in age. Chase Brown really did a nice job. Again, they were getting the ball to Jamar Chase. And, we're picking Browning apart a little bit for these interceptions and some of the easy stuff that Zac Taylor drew up for him. But there were some throws they made that were really, really impressive. There was one there on that drive, or a couple on that drive, where he threw it up to Jamar Chase, and it was a really nice play there towards the boundary. And how about Mitchell Tinsley, right? He makes the team with his performance in the preseason. Only had one catch, but it was unbelievable. And Browning talked after the game like that's his guy, right? You know, working with the backups, like he's going to Mitchell Tinsley. That's what he's been doing in practice all these weeks. One-handed grab by Tinsley, unbelievable. And it feels like you're right back in the ballgame. Jacksonville goes 3 and out right after that. Hendrickson is there to make some big plays as he continued to do. And then Cincinnati gets the ball back, and you're thinking, oh, they're going to go down and perhaps, you know, score points, take a lead here in this game. And then you have another interception from Jake Browning. This one was the bad one. Like, this was, you know, he's rolling out to his right. You know, it wasn't there. He's got 3 guys around Mike Gesicki who love Mike Gesicki, and he needs to be more of a focal point in this offense. But it's not like you're throwing it to Jamar Chase or T. Higgins there, right? And there's 3 dudes, and you just kind of throw it up. And obviously that was not a good situation there for Jake Browning. And then Jacksonville able to immediately respond. Shamar Stewart had a key missed tackle there on that drive. Really good play design there on the ETN touchdown. Kind of just lines up as a receiver. Lawrence gets him quickly. They had blockers. Easy score for Jacksonville, and they kind of reassert their dominance in the game. And then you're thinking, you know, the Bengals are cooked. Move on to next week. We'll see what happens. And then they're back, right? It just kind of roller coaster game for Cincinnati, as it typically is. You know, the 3rd and 5 was a situation they had it in plus territory. Blitz was coming, and they threw it up to T. Beautiful throw by Jake Browning. He absorbed the 2 hits, and he gets in for a touchdown. And, you know, that certainly was a very, very key play in the game. And, you know, and you got some good fortune, right, as the game progressed after it beyond that point once you got into the 4th quarter. Just kind of it felt unorganized and chaotic for Jacksonville when they were trying to do things offensively. They moved the ball really, really well, but there were just situations where it felt like they weren't on the same page. They had a big drop on that drive after T. Higgins scored the touchdown where De'Ami Brown, he can win the game basically with a touchdown. He drops it, and then a really nice play by Jordan Battle on 3rd and goal. That obviously, you know, puts you in a good situation. You know, then you go 3 and out, Cincinnati. And then you get, you know, a big stop, and you're kind of going back and forth a little bit there at the end in the 4th quarter. You have another interception from Jake Browning. He wanted Yoshi. It was a bad throw. You can't do it there with the linebacker. Great play by Devin Lloyd. And, you know, at that point, kind of felt like you were in a tough spot. But the Cincinnati Bengals defense came up really, really big. Dax Hill had an incredible play there on that drive. It was a massive tackle for a loss. And then 4th and 5 with 3 minutes and 45 seconds to go, up 3. Liam Cohen elects to go for it on 4th down. And, you know, I don't know if he's getting criticized in Jacksonville for going for it. He shouldn't. I questioned it in the moment, but he drew up a perfect play, and it was right there for Brian Thomas to make it, and he dropped it. And then, obviously, the game completely shifted at that point. Cincinnati had it back for their final time. And Jake Browning, he did his thing. And Zac Taylor did his thing as well. 4th and 3 on your own 15 with like 3 minutes left, 2-minute warning, and all your timeouts. Zac Taylor says we're staying on the football field, right? People criticize Zac Taylor for being soft or not being aggressive enough. Well, going for it on 4th and 3 at your own 15 with all of your timeouts left and a backup quarterback, yeah, I don't think there's anything soft about that or anything, you know, not gutsy about that. I think Zac Taylor did a nice job. Had a perfect play there, by the way, for Chase Brown out of the backfield. They pick up a 1st down. And then the play a lot of people nationally are talking about, right? The 4th and 5 situation. You throw it up to Yoshi, which that kind of is a bit of a head-scratcher, right? Like, that's the guy you're going to go to with the game on the line, 4th and 5. And they call PI on Travis Hunter. They were saying on the broadcast that he didn't get his head turned around, you know, as quickly as he should have. But, you know, the Bengals will take it, right? I mean, how many games have they lost where a call goes against them? They got one to go their way late. And, you know, be very clear. Just because they got the call, that didn't put it in the end zone for them, right? They still had to make some big plays after that. You know, there was a couple of really nice passes from Jake Browning. There was the one right after that play where a defender was coming to take his face off, and he ripped it to the boundary, hit Jamar. That was a big chunk play. You're down on the goal line, typical Bengals fashion. You mess around a little bit there. Reisner in the neutral zone. You get offsides on your offense, right, which is just, a tough situation to be in, obviously, for Cincinnati. But then you hit Gesicki, who nearly is able to get into the end zone. By the way, Gesicki got to be more involved in the game plan. He's a really, really good player. You paid him, right, and he fits into this offense perfectly. And even with Burrow out, look for Mike Gesicki to be a guy that Jake Browning really leans on as we go forward. And you were able to get it right back on the inch line, and then Browning able to get across, give you your first lead of the ball game. And obviously that ended up winning the game. Trey Hendrickson called game on the ensuing possession for Jacksonville as he was able to sack Trevor Lawrence, and that basically put a wrap on it. But that's kind of how you got there as far as the end of the game. And, up and down game, crazy game, chaotic game. But, if you can kind of distance yourself a little bit from the Burrow injury and just talk about what transpired on the football field, it really, really was an incredible game for the Cincinnati Bengals. And, hey, they find themselves in a position where they are 2-0 through 2 weeks. So, that's kind of our game recap. I like doing those, to be completely honest with you. I think it's valuable because, you watch the game, and then, I think a lot of people today are just kind of sitting there thinking, oh, Burrow, right? Burrow's out. There were still lots of plays that were made throughout the game that allowed Cincinnati to win. But at the end of the day, they've kind of been gifted 2 games here through 2 weeks. And, now they will go on and face Minnesota next week, and we'll see, obviously, what they are able to do against Brian Flores and that defense. But there is a path. There very much is a path for Cincinnati to get to the postseason. Again, maybe I'm a glass half full guy. That's fine. I don't have any problems being a glass half full guy. But with the schedule where it's at, it's going to get challenging, but there's also games that you can win. And mind you, it's not like everybody's hurt. It's not like you have backups everywhere. Yeah, your best player and the most important player is hurt, but you have a competent guy that can come in relief of him, and you still have a bunch of skill guys all across the board as well, with 2 of the best, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. But the stat, obviously, that I'm kind of thinking about a lot right now is what we were talking about, that stat from Schefter earlier in the show. Pass block win rate, 2020, 29th, 2021, 30th. 2022, 30th, 2023, 27th, 2024, 32nd, and here this year through a couple of games, 28th. Obviously not getting it done, and your franchise is hurt. And I mean the face of your franchise is hurt because of it. As far as rest of the NFL, we're about out of time here on the show today. We'll kind of run through some of the scores that we got. It was a very, exciting week in football, both collegiately and the National Football League. Again, 3-3 in our best bets of the weekend. We'll continue to do those as we progress. Hopefully we can get that 500 record and essentially improve it to a winning week. But Philadelphia beats Kansas City 20-17. That's certainly very interesting. Mahomes 0-2 to start the year. He's lost 3 games. First time that's ever happened in his career. Obviously, the first of which being the Super Bowl last season. Teams that make 0-2, the stats say they flat out don't make the playoffs. I think Kansas City will probably prove those stats to be wrong, but that certainly is very, very interesting. The Minnesota Vikings, again, who Cincinnati play, next week on the road in Minnesota, 22-6. They lost to Atlanta. J.J. McCarthy, he stinks. There's no 2 ways around that. That's just the reality of the situation. So very much a game you can win next week. Colts beat the Broncos 29-28. That's certainly interesting, right? Again, we're through 2 weeks, but in the back of my mind, I'm already starting to do, math, right? Thinking about potential wild card teams, what have you. Denver, I have a feeling, is a team that you're going to need to root against. If you're the Cincinnati Bengals, they lose to Indianapolis. The Ravens handle Cleveland, no issues whatsoever, 41-17. I think all of us saw that coming as they responded in a big way after that collapsing, devastating loss against the Buffalo Bills in Week 1. Buffalo, by the way, ends up winning 30-10. That was one of our best bets of the weekend. Pittsburgh loses 31-17. Again, that's going to be a team that you have a close eye on. Even before this injury, before these things transpired here in Week 2, I kind of was sitting there saying, yeah, Pittsburgh, that's a team you're probably going to be pretty even with, and a team that you're going to be, obviously they're in your division and nobody likes Pittsburgh, so you're going to be rooting against them anyway. But they're a team that, really obviously are, probably going to be a team which you're competing with to make the postseason. Rams beat the Titans 33-19. Patriots beat the Dolphins 33-27. So they're a little bit, better Miami, a little bit better performance than what you saw in week 1, but really still a dumpster fire there in South Beach. Also, the Bengals, as I talked about earlier in the show, they're going to sign a veteran quarterback. Are they going to trade for somebody? No, right? This team feels very comfortable with Jake Browning at the helm. Obviously not as comfortable as if Joe Burrow was at the helm, but Jake Browning is going to be the starter unless, of course, he gets hurt. But they are going to want to have a better backup option behind him. I think they want to look somewhere else besides Brett Ripien, right? He's the practice squad guy right now, but I think they'll bring in a veteran. Are they going to trade for Kirk Cousins or Jameis Winston or somebody like that? No, I don't think that is the situation whatsoever. But Jake Browning, probably the best backup quarterback in the National Football League. Okay, you could say, Kirk Cousins probably the best, maybe Mac Jones after that, but I would rather have, Jake Browning than a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, right? And I think Garoppolo is probably a top 5 backup in the National Football League as well. So I think the Bengals are in a fine spot. This is why you kept Jake Browning around despite the season he had in 2023. Probably could have gone somewhere else. It was important for you to keep him here in Cincinnati. You did that. Now he's going to be called upon here in 2025 to make some things happen for the Cincinnati Bengals football team. But that'll do it for today's show. Appreciate everyone that hung out with us through Off the Bench and stayed through with my show there as well. We will be coming at you every single weekday here this week from 11 to noon. And, of course, Off the Bench precedes that from 10 to 11. So lots of Bengals conversation, obviously, on today's show. Be sure to look out on our social media pages. We will have updates when Zack Taylor talks about some of the injuries that transpired for Cincinnati. Shamar Stewart, didn't even really get to mention him much, but he is banged up too. And it feels like it's a week-to-week situation with him and his ankle injury, but we'll see if perhaps he could be out for a little bit longer than that. That certainly would not be good, considering that he's off to a really solid start, I think, through 2 weeks for the Cincinnati Bengals. But there will be a Joe Burrow injury update, I'm sure, at some point when Zac Taylor addresses the media later today. So make sure you stay on the lookout for that. Again, appreciate everybody hanging out, and make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that thumbs up icon if you haven't done so already, and looking forward to a full week of coverage here as we begin week 2 here at the Stone Shield Show. But until tomorrow, make sure you take care, and we'll talk to you tomorrow right here on Chatterbox Sports. Take care, everybody.